Welcome everyone to What is Your Problem? Using standards to actually deal with problems in your chapter. My name is Emily Britt and I will be one of our presenters today. I graduated from Center College in Danville, Kentucky, where I joined Kappa. I am the Standards and Recruitment Advisor for Zeta Gamma in my Kappa job. And in my real job, I'm an Assistant Director of Fraternity and Sorority Affairs at the University of Kentucky. My co-presenter is Erin Grumley, and I'm going to have her introduce herself as well.
Hi, I am Erin Grumley. I graduated from Zeta Gamma at Center College. My Kappa job is I am a standards advisor for UCLA, and my real life job is that I am a gang prevention counselor at a program in South Los Angeles.
So tonight we are going to cover a few things related to standards and how you can improve the function and efficiency and effectiveness of your committee. So we have three goals. The first one is to talk about some really important and most important features of the standards committee and committee meetings. We are also going to show you the problem analysis framework and how you can use that as a template for improving your process and standards. And we're also going to give you the tools for doing this training in your own standards committee. You should have received an email with the facilitator guide for today's workshop. If you didn't get that, contact Colette, who's the director of standards, or one of us. Our contact information will be at the end, and we'll be happy to share that document with you. So before we dive right in, we have a couple important reminders and vocabulary terms that we want to review. So the first ones are there is a VPS webinar all about being the vice president of standards, and you must watch that. It is all of the nuts and bolts that you need to be an effective VPS. We will cover some of that tonight, but that is really focused all on your role, and this is more focused on the committee meeting. The next is that there are also webinars available for liaison positions. Those webinars are short. I think the longest one is 20 minutes, and they're really great for you and your committee members to watch so they understand their role on the committee. So now let's talk about some important terms. Tonight we're going to talk about probation and outcomes. When we talk about standards committee meetings, lots of times when a member comes to meet with standards, probation is the thing that happens. They are placed on probation because they violated our policies or expectations. We will also use the words outcomes tonight because sometimes there's probation plus other things that might go on that something that standards needs to do or the chapter needs to do, or sometimes that member comes in and they're not placed on standards, but there's still some outcomes of that meeting. We're going to talk more about probation, but remember that Kappa's probation is a positive probation. It is designed to pull that member back in, and those probation terms are really important. Next, we've already mentioned liaisons. Liaisons are members of your committee who work with different positions on chapter council who frequently refer members to standards or have issues that come up in standards. It's really important that you take advantage of those. And next is your leadership guide. Your leadership guide is your how-to manual for VPS. It is available on the website. Make sure you have the most up-to-date copy. You may have been handed a binder when you took over this position, and that's great, but it might be a little out of date. So make sure that you're always referring to the most updated versions, which are always on the Kappa website, and we'll show you how to find those resources tonight. So now Erin's going to run us through the basic role of standards.
So, when you start your standards, your first week on standards, one of the big questions that I hear a lot is what does standards actually deal with? Who gets called in? So we deal with the facts, and I already put the F up here. F for finance, people who owe money, people who aren't keeping up with their payment plans or have fallen behind on their monthly due or their quarterly and um, quarterly and semesterly dues. Sorry. A is attendance. After a member falls behind on whatever your attendance policy is, it's per chapter and it should be in your bylaws and standing rules. but when a member has fallen behind on what is expected for attendance in your chapter, they should be called into standards. CU's conduct, alcohol issues, stealing, unsisterly conduct, etc. Those are the big red flags that we all assume when we all hear standards. And teamwork. These are officers or committee members who are not doing their job. Or you can also call people in for positive reasons. If an officer just did something awesome, or somebody on a committee really stepped up and helped out with an event, this is something, maybe call them in and give them a cupcake. And then S for scholarship. Member that does not follow through with their POC terms or is of a special concern. If a officer may not have a high enough GPA anymore, this might be somebody that you see, or your academic committee is going to be meeting with people whose grades are concerning to them, and they give them terms similar to our probation terms, and as members are not keeping up with those, they'll get sent to you. Standards is also in charge of spirit and morale. There's no special letter for that. So what does a meeting look like? You want to make sure that your meeting is at the same time and in the same place every week, so that way everybody knows when standards is meeting. Because we have an open door policy, you should definitely, this is a moment for members to come in and talk to the committee about any concerns that they have, whether it's chapter or personal. But the first 10 to 15 minutes of every meeting should be an open door time for your chapter members to come in and approach you all. Then you're going to move on to your liaison reports. We'll get into in a second what all of the liaisons are, but this is a chance for each of your members of your committee to let you know what's going on in your chapter. Plan your sisterhoods and spirit and morale, award voting, and then you move on to your member meetings. These are the big ones. So before you call a member in, you want to gather information, prepare some questions. You're going to call your member in, present her side of the story, and then it's really important then after she talks that you ask that member to step out so that your committee can discuss what action is going to be taken. Even if you already know, if this is you have 18 people coming in for attendance issues this evening and you kind of know what everybody's going to be doing for their probation terms that night, it's still really important that you ask every member to step out, so that way you want to make sure that you're hearing what she's saying. So having her step out gives you an opportunity to, reassess what she just brought to you on her side of the story, and lets you take that into making an informed decision about her probation term. And then you call her back in, let her know what the committee's decision is, and if she is being put on probation, have her sign her probation form. Some general suggestions that we have is just to prep your agenda in advance so that everyone is prepared for what you're going to be covering in that meeting. If you do have like I just said, 18 people coming in for attendance, you know it's going to be a long meeting. So if your committee all knows that, they can prepare ahead. So liaisons. So I do want to take a second and go over each of the liaison positions that we keep mentioning. VPSs, it's really, really important that you utilize these. By having your committee take on these positions, you're not only letting your committee have some of the ownership of what the standards is doing, but it also becomes less of a one-man show. And you already have an extremely heavy workload as the VPS, so this is just a place where your committee can step in and help you. So our first liaison is house. They bring any concerns for house, parking, dining, or room assignments. If you are an unhoused chapter, this might have to do with your chapter room, if somebody left it a mess, there's graffiti on the walls, or anything of that sort. Those are the kind of things that your house liaison will be dealing with. Finance. These would be members who have missed payment deadlines. You're going to get those from your treasurer. Attendance, people who have missed, like we said earlier, a specific number of events, or they've missed a mandatory event. And all of that will be spelled out in your chapter documents, and you'll get that from your recording secretary. Um, Academics, people who are missing their POC terms or special concern, like officers, and you'll get those from your VPAE. Risk, behavioral issues at parties or events, getting those from your risk manager. And then education, these are people who are struggling to meet the terms of their senior contracts. You'll get them from your education chair. Emily, do you want to take on paperwork?
Yeah. So the next thing we wanted to review with you is some important paperwork that you need to have handy and be familiar with. The first piece is the minutes template. There is a new minutes template this year. So if you're a returning VPS or you were on the committee before, make sure you have downloaded the new minutes template from the website and that you are using it. Colette, our director of standards, and her assistants are asking that all chapters use this year. So make sure you're doing that. It is also really important to take great minutes as a standards committee. This might mean that you as a VPS need to delegate that responsibility to somebody else on your committee who can still participate in what's going on, but is really focused on making sure you have good notes about who got called in, why they were called in, what decision was made, and how that decision was made. That's really important that you have somebody doing that, especially if you have someone who's a recurring problem. If you don't have good minutes that document that, it's going to be really difficult to appropriately address that member. Also, make sure that you're sending the minutes to the assistants, to the director of standards each week, and make sure you're including all the documents from that meeting in that one email. So the minutes template is one of those. The next one is the probation form. There's also a new probation form this year, and we're going to show you that document. The probation form walks you through all of the things that you need to note when you're placing a member on probation. So it will have where you can put in information about that member, her name, if she's an officer, did she come to the meeting or not? Because remember, standards can still make actions and decisions about an outcome for a member, even if they choose not to show for the meeting. We don't like to do that, but we can and should sometimes. You'll also go in and note, we put this member on a warning of probation, we put this member on probation, and here's what was the decision that was made. It's really important, again, that you're as specific as possible in the probation form so that when this gets reviewed by the assistant to the director of standards, or if you're having to refer back to it later when you're taking that member off probation, or you have somebody coming back in to be put on probation again, that you have good notes about what happened the last time we were here. Okay, and then the last thing that we are recommending, this is not required, is a calendar. Both Aaron and I use this with our groups, and it's really helpful to have a standards calendar. We can keep track of regular things that are going on that may come up for standards. So like when you refer members for past due bills. That should be at a standard date, so you know it. Put that on the calendar, but also put all your standards meetings on the calendar, and you can use those like events on the calendar to keep the sort of agenda so that people can know. If you're going to use a calendar like a Google Calendar, which is what they use at UCLA, it's really important that that calendar is extremely confidential, just like everything else in standards is confidential. So you want to make sure that it's not something that you're sharing with other people, that your committee members are not sharing it, and it's not something that people can easily access, so that you can take good notes in that calendar. That goes back to just being prepared and organized as a committee. That will make your meetings more efficient. That will make you feel more confident about the decisions that you're making, because you know that you're prepared for the meeting every week when you walk in, and we highly recommend that calendar. Okay, so those are the three big paperwork things that we will refer to. There are more things that are available on the website, and we'll show you some of that in a little bit. But now let's talk about probation. So remember, probation is not just a punishment, it is a way to find something to re engage that member in the chapter. We believe that when we create probation terms that are appropriate for the member and for the action, that it is easier to show them how their actions impact our whole chapter. So we never want to give a probation term that's overly punitive. We really want to find things that re engage that member on the website. So we're going to show you how to get to this. There is a document called suggested probation terms, I think is what it's called. And that shows you a lot of different terms of probation that you could give someone based on the circumstance. So if you go to the website on the member side and you click on more resources, it will load a whole list of positions, and you go to VPS and that document will be there. But you can look through that document and say, we have someone coming in for academics, and these are some options that we have in suggested probation terms if you really don't know what to do. And that list is pretty long. We recommend that this is one of those that you keep in hard copy so you can make notes on it or star things that have been really effective for you in the past. So it's called Suggested Guidelines for Specific Situations. Very clear. So keep notes on that. Use it for next year and those kinds of things, especially if you find something that really seems to work with your membership and your chapter. So a couple of things to note about probation. Probation can only the minimum probation term is 2 weeks and the maximum is 10 weeks, which would include any extensions. So if a member is placed on probation and fails to meet the terms of their probation, whatever those terms are that you created, they can be placed on an extension of probation. You have to stay within that 10 weeks unless you have prior approval from the Director of Standards. So don't extend somebody's probation past that 10-week mark without already knowing that you have the ability to do that. You can only extend a probation once, and then that member needs to be up for dismissal, because if they have failed to meet their probation terms twice for the same incident, like they're obviously not meeting our standards and don't understand why they need to, or don't care enough to do it. So that is when we would move for dismissal. When you're taking a member off probation, you want to go ahead and have them come back to standards to talk about how they completed their probation, what they've learned, any feedback or suggestions that they have for you. This is a great way to use that calendar to just automatically schedule that next meeting to say, Sally, you've been placed on a 3-week probation, so we'll see you in 3 weeks, and that date is XYZ, and you've already put it on your calendar. So remember, there are also some restrictions for members who are placed on probation. First of all, they cannot vote. That includes officer elections, membership selection, anything like that. If they're an officer, they need to temporarily step down during the length of their probation from their office. If you're having a very long probation term, you might also consider having them removed from office if that's appropriate, but they have to step down. And then you may have other things in your chapter documents, your bylaws or standing rules that are automatic on standards stipulations. So that might be she can't take a little sister, or she's not eligible to participate in certain activities as an officer, those kinds of things. So just make sure that you're referring back to your chapter documents. And before you add things to your chapter documents that are always required of probation, make sure you're asking your PDC or your assistant to the Director of Standards for your region if they think those things are great or would recommend them, because you don't want to add something that's not supported. Okay. So now we are going to talk about the problem analysis framework. So the problem analysis framework is really just a template of questions to ask yourself as you're working through a problem. We believe that 90% of finding a good solution to a problem is clearly identifying that problem. When individual women in our chapters are coming to standards, they're frequently coming for incidents, but incidents are not problems. Those are symptoms. So when you think about this in the context of, say, a social media violation, you may have a member who posted an inappropriate picture, let's just say, of her friend passed out in the bathroom, and you can visibly see something Kappa, or they hashtagged something inappropriate in regards to the fraternity. The post on social media isn't the problem. It is a symptom of a larger problem. That problem might be she doesn't respect her sister, who is obviously not okay if she's passed out, or she may not understand how our policies relate to social media, or she may not understand how she is always representing the fraternity, even if it's not clearly marked that way. That her behavior is a problem. It's not the social media post, it's deeper than that. So this framework is designed to help you really figure out what that problem is, so that when you're designing outcomes, probation terms, or those kinds of things, you're really doing something that really aligns with the problem and not just the incident or the symptom, because that's when we're not effective at changing behavior. So Erin's going to take us through the framework. It's several different steps, and those are all outlined in the facilitator guide, which also includes a worksheet. But we're going to review those steps and then use a case study throughout that to help explain.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. Step one, describe the incident. So what is the incident that brought this member to standards? Identify what you know and how you know it. Um, if so, this is when you got a report, your liaison got a report from somebody about this member, and you made the decision to call her into standards. So this is what you are going to be sharing with your committee. So I know this seems basic, but don't skip it. Everyone in your committee needs to be on the same page, and somebody on your committee may know something that is relevant that you and your committee won't already know. So this might look like the member was sent home from formal early by the risk management chair for being too drunk. She was observed stumbling, yelling at members, and getting sick in the bathroom. The risk management chair notified the standards liaison following formal. So step two would be describe the chain of events. Identifying what happened prior to, during, and after the event helps us understand what was happening with the member and may highlight some underlying issues. This might look like last semester, this member was, we learned that earlier this week that this member's mom lost her job and she is concerned about paying tuition bills next semester. She attended a pregame function before the formal with her date where she was encouraged to drink and did not keep track of her consumption. After formal, she emailed the risk management chairman to apologize for her behavior. And then step three is going to be identify the problem. So this is when you're going to ask yourself, what actually is the problem with this member? What is causing the inappropriate and dangerous or rule-breaking behavior? Push yourself to identify what the problem is and not just the violation, like Emily was saying. You're looking for both a what, as in what rule was broken, and a why. Advisors, this can be really helpful. You can be a really big help here by asking questions to the committee and helping identify things that the committee members may not see in advance. This means looking at possible social media issues, the lack of respect for self and others, just like Emily was saying, and not just posting inappropriate pictures on Instagram. So this might look like the member has personal issues with her family finance situation that are causing her a lot of stress, and the member did not pay attention to her alcohol consumption and did not follow CAPA policies about risk management and alcohol. So Emily is going to pick up from here with getting into the nitty-gritty part of the problem analysis framework.
Right, so we're on step 4, and step 4 actually has 3 parts, because what we're going to do is describe contributing factors. There are 3 kinds of contributing factors: risk factors, vulnerability factors, and protective factors. So the first one we're going to talk about are risk factors. Risk factors are things about the environment or circumstance or culture of an event around an incident that might contribute to a problem. This might look like in our example that formal occurred on the same day as a major sporting event at the university where tailgating is very popular. So a risk factor is something about the environment. It's something about where we live. It might be something about your chapter as a whole. It might be something about the Panhellenic community or the Greek community. It might be about the university. It might just be about people in general. There are risk factors around us. So in this example, there's something going on that day that contributes to the increased risk that a member might drink too much before the event that night. And that is a risk factor. Okay, so the next kind of contributing factor are vulnerability factors. Vulnerability factors are features about the individual or the organization that make them more vulnerable to the problem. This is what makes us more susceptible to the issue at hand. So in our example here, this might look like the member's been cited before by the university for alcohol violations, or it's common for members of the chapter to host or attend pregame functions where drinking is really popular amongst underage members. That is a common vulnerability factor. That's something about us or about this individual member that's going to make them more susceptible to having this problem come into their life. And then the last kind of contributing factor is a protective factor. And these are things we like. Protective factors are features about the individual or organization that mitigate the problem. So these are things that are true about us that help us prevent the problem from being an issue for us. So in our example here, this might look like that the risk manager has always reviewed the expectations and the event contracts and policies before events hosted by the chapter. So everybody should know what's expected of them. This also might look like the education chair hosted a program about safe tailgating practices with a mocktail competition all around responsible alcohol consumption. So we've already done some things to prepare us to be ready to handle this problem when it comes up. This is prior education, this is prior experience or knowledge. So our goal in identifying these factors is to recognize that there are things going on around this incident that make it difficult or might influence the things we decide to do to address it. If we don't pay attention to these, we're like have our blinders on. We're not paying attention to what might really be going on. So we may design something that is redundant. We might say, as a probation term, like, we need you to work with the event chair to talk about safe tailgating. We already did that. We've already done some education there. So what is missing about that? Our goal is we want to decrease risk and vulnerability factors by increasing our protective factors. We want to use those to work like they are as protective factors to help us. So those are the three kinds of contributing factors and step 4 of the framework. Erin's now going to talk to us about the next couple steps in the framework.
All right, so step 5 in the framework, after you have gone through all of these your 3-part step, you need to identify the problem again. So what is actually the problem with this member, and what is causing the inappropriate or dangerous behaviors? So this is a chance for you to like recap everything that we've just gone over, and this is when you figure out what the problem actually is. And this is something, again, you don't want to skip. You want to make sure, because now you've brought in a lot of extra information from the last time that you talked about what the problem is. You've learned a lot. So this might look like the member has personal issues with her family situation that are causing her a lot of stress. The chapter has a culture of pregame functions where underage members drink before socials sponsored by the chapter, and this member has a history of drinking in times of stress. So problem 6 is going to be developing intervention strategies. What will be appropriate outcomes for this member in this particular situation? So what is going to help you address both this member and the chapter? So this might look like putting a member on probation for 3 weeks, and that includes expectations that she participate in an evaluation with the campus counseling center about stress management and her relationship to alcohol consumption. And the VPS might work with the risk management chair to discuss doing a pregame function. That maybe they host a dinner where before formal. So in step 7 is following up. Meet with a member after her probation terms have been completed and talk with her about her probation. This is so important to make sure that you are meeting with these members at the end of their probation to evaluate if they followed through or not. So this might look like a member completed her counseling assessment and has been working on new stress relief strategies. And the standards advisor encouraged this member to talk with the financial aid office and discuss options for tuition bills with the challenges and changes that her family is going through.
Awesome.
Um, so Emily, you want to take us into asking good questions?
Yeah, so asking good questions is a fundamental underlying premise of this framework. One thing that I will mention is when we're looking at all of the steps, we want to think of steps one through four. So that sort of initially describing the incident, describing the chain of events, identifying the problem, and describing the contributing factors. We're going to do that before the member meets with us and sort of as they are talking with us. They know more about the chain of events than we do. They know themselves, we know the chapter. So we're trying to fill in the whole picture. And that's where these questions really come into play. So before the member comes to meet with standards, you need to outline what do we know and what do we need to know? How can I better fill in this chain of events? I know that she was too drunk at formal, but do I know where she was beforehand? Do I know what she did immediately after? How does that play into this? So we want to be prepared with some good questions to ask her so that then she's able to fill in the whole picture for us. And after she steps out and we're talking about it, we can re-identify the problem, which might be with that member. It could be with our chapter. It could be with the community. We're not going to be able to solve all the problems, but this framework is going to help us figure out what we can do to address the problem instead of just, throwing some probation terms on there and calling it a day. So when we're thinking about questions, we want to be sure to consider that strong questions are open-ended and allow the member to really tell their full story. We want to give them the opportunity to give us a narrative rather than interrogate them with some really short answer questions. The next is we want to ask follow-up questions to be sure that we really understand what they're saying. So if you're sitting in the meeting and you're like, I don't understand what she's talking about, you need to ask, because if she walks out of the room, we're not going to know, and we need to give her the ability to really explain herself in a way that's going to fairly and accurately give us a picture of what's happening. We want to do that because we care about her and she's our sister, but we also want to do that because if we don't know what's happening, we can't be effective in creating outcomes. We also want to get her feedback on what the committee should do. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what do you think should happen? If you were in our shoes, what decision would you make? She may have already done some stuff that we don't know about, and this gives her the ability to say, like in our example, I already apologized to the risk manager. I feel so bad about this. If I were you, I think I would do this. Or I don't know what to do because I'm so overwhelmed with what's going on in my life. Or this might demonstrate that she really has a bad attitude about it, and that also informs your decision as it relates to the outcome here. Also, remember, if you're facing chronic issues in your chapter, if you've got issues with attendance or apathy or nobody pays dues on time or those kinds of things, you need to be willing to ask the question and hear the answer that might hurt your feelings. If you've got a big attendance issue, especially, be willing to hear like meetings are boring and I don't get anything out of them. That's not that member's fault. That might be us as chapter council and as leaders in our organization to say, okay, well, you still have to come, but what can we do as an outcome to make this more interesting so that our members want to be here and we are also addressing it? I think you'll see if you take that approach that your chapter will be more willing to buy into the things that you're trying to do. You'll have an attitude turnaround and more willingness to engage to say, like, I voiced an opinion and something actually happened. So you might see a little less complaining. So now we'll talk about how you can use this in your chapter. So again, you should have the facilitator guide. That's a step-by-step training to do this with your standards board. If you read through that training verbatim, you should come out okay in helping them understand this framework and how to use it. It does have a worksheet, so you can fill that in as you're going. I know it seems bulky or like a lot of work, and it can be at first. So it's not something that I would use for every situation. Some are cut and dry, like we know what happened and here it is. But for those issues that you're trying to tackle that you don't know what to do about, I would encourage you to use that worksheet. And the more you use it, the more familiar you'll be with it. And so it will just kind of become second nature to kind of ask those questions and figure out what's going on. This is, again, a template that you get to fill in. One of the really big benefits to this is that if you use it effectively, you're going to get better information, which leads to better decisions, and it can increase the confidence that you have that you're treating your members fairly and that you're making a change in the chapter. That's one of the big things that we want to do is this can increase the consistency of giving members probation terms that match and are going to change behavior. We want to treat people consistently, but that doesn't always mean that probation terms are act like 100% the same across the board. You might have two members involved in the same incident, the same situation that's a rule violation, and they might get different outcomes, but those outcomes should be equivalent. But if we really talked to that member and figured out what's going on, we might realize that Sally's too drunk at formal because she's got this personal issue going on with her family and she's really stressed out, whereas Susie just has a misunderstanding of what's expected of her, and we need to clarify that. So there's going to be a consistency. So it might be the same length of probation, but those individual terms look different. Consistency is fair. Fair doesn't have to be exactly the same. So we will give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. Our contact information is available to you if you want us to talk you more through any of this training. Shoot us an email. We're happy to talk about that or things that you might implement in standards to be more effective, and we really appreciate your time. Erin, anything else that you would like to say to wrap us up?
I think we've